Hey friends, and welcome to week 5. This is going to be lecture 1. This week we're going to have 4 lectures plus an interview with our General Superintendent, Carla Sundberg, which is a great interview that I think you'll thoroughly enjoy. Well, let's jump into this week 5. So far we started with embracing the moment that we find ourselves in, this complex moment that has become a part of our lives. Then we talked about exploring what kind of shifts and changes that have taken place that are so destabilizing. Then we sought to make some substantive shifts in our thinking and in our postures, in the way in which we perceive the threats and challenges before us. And then we sought to define clearly terminology, the way in which we use language, the stories that we tell. This week, I want to do a little bit about reorienting, and there's going to be several elements that we're going to talk about here. But I want to talk to us a lot about reorienting ourselves towards a missional posture, okay? Because if this is missional movement in an age of complexity, we've examined complexity. Now we need to examine the missional work of the church a little bit more thoroughly. Now, for a more comprehensive view of missional theology and the missional church, I do teach a course in the master's program called Missional Theology. It's actually the course following this. And so if you have yet to sign up for our master's program, if you're auditing this class and would like to pick up a master's degree, please talk to us about that because I think you'd really enjoy the whole of this program rather than just this course. Okay, so let's explore this a little bit, shall we? Let's talk a little bit about what it means to make the reorientation towards a missional posture and perspective of what God is up to in the world. A friend of mine was telling me that when he flies, especially when he flies into places where there's a change in time zones, and he knows that he's going to be facing some form of jet lag, he does something, and it's something that he heard about, and I thought was something very interesting. He says he does earthing, or grounding is what it's called. So the minute he lands from the airport, he collects his stuff, he jumps in his Uber or his cab or wherever, and wherever he goes, wherever he's being dropped off, he walks into the grass somewhere, he takes off his shoes and his socks, and he grinds his feet in the dirt of the actual place where he is now finding himself. And it's something to do with the electric energy that moves through your body that's disrupted when we fly, but it grounds him in that location, in that place. And I thought, man, what a great metaphor for missional ministry. That missional ministry is born of this idea of grounding ourselves, that we need to sink our toes into the dirt of the context that we find ourselves in. Because in missional ministry, context matters. Now, we've got to explore this a little further, because much of what we've understood ministry to be within the North American experience has been born of 2 words, and those were based upon the assumptions, and I'm not going to go back to it, but the philosophical assumptions of modernity. And those 2 words that have sway over how we do ministry are homogeneity and hegemony. Okay, and I'm going to define both of those words. Homogeneity is really the state or the equality of everybody being the same, right? The state or quality of everything being the same. So really what homogeneity operates out of is this idea that at the essence, whatever we want to call that essence, we are all really the same kinds of people. So I don't have to change what I say, what I say, how I engage, the very nature of ministry. Why would I? Because at the heart, I don't care if I'm here or if I'm in the Middle East or if I'm in the Far East. It doesn't matter, because we're really all just the same. It impacts our messaging. Our messaging becomes sterile, becomes flat, becomes principle-based. The assumptions of our ministry are no longer defined by the different locations that we find ourselves in, and we make assumptions or presume upon a local community the kinds of needs that it must have, because in the end, everybody's really the same. And what it leads to is, even when we talk about multiplication, it leads to sort of a franchise model of ministry, in which you just sort of take what's being done here and transplant that over here, and you have a new franchise of the exact same ministry regardless of the different contexts that we find ourselves in. The second word that I want to look at is hegemony. And hegemony is leadership or dominance, especially by one country or social group over others. And this can be political, it can be religious, it can be cultural, and oftentimes it's all three. And the way in which this is looked like for the church in terms of its mission is it's often taken the appeal of sort of an imperialism or a colonialism. Sort of by mandate we go, and then we just try to settle in and take over an area and make that area look just like those who were sent there. So we've seen this in the harmful effects and the way in which it's taken place all across the globe in what we would call foreign missions. But I want to suggest to us that colonialism impacts and affects and influences everything it's why in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, early 2000s, that you could go to a ministry conference and they would hand you a binder and they would say, regardless of your context, regardless of where you are, just put into place these steps and this will give you the outcome that you look for. It's the belief that we can sort of colonize or implement some sort of hegemony over a culture and make it look like us. Both operate under the assumptions of a dominant order and a context-independent model of Christianity. So in the Western case, Christianity, because we're a Christian nation, exercises this sort of dominant order influence over other places, and even within the context of cities or subgroups within the nation, we impose the expectations of the dominant order. So let's say it this way: we want subgroups, ethnic groups, to look just like white middle class evangelicalism. We make those assumptions. And it doesn't really matter where we are or what the location is or what the context that we find ourselves in. We want it all to look the same. And so homogeneity and hegemony impact great influence over what we do and how we do what we do in ministry. There's a great book. It's called The Celtic Way of Evangelism, and it explores the difference between sort of the Roman imperial missional mandate and St. Patrick, who was this sort of enculturated missionary within the context of Ireland. Now, I'm going to save you the story in its totality, but St. Patrick had been captured by the Irish, had been held captive in Ireland, makes his way back to the main island of England, or the United Kingdom, what we would call the United Kingdom, and eventually, after his conversion to Christ, he feels this missional impulse to go back to his captors. And as he goes, he doesn't go in this sort of imperial mandate or as a colonizer, but he steps in and he embeds himself within the context of the culture and the context that he finds himself in. And he begins to take on the life of the people. And it's out of that richness and depth of incarnational, incultural ministry that I think that something powerful happens. Imperial ministry is hierarchical, it's dependent upon a centralized organization, and it's clunky. Inculturalism is flat, independent, dispersive, and nimble. And in order to see a movement take place, I do believe there has to be a shift to this enculturated ministry. Missional means taking serious the contextual needs of a community. It's about living an embodied faith and presence in a community, incarnational. Jesus puts on flesh and makes his dwelling amongst us. But it's also about being inculturational, which means it's living into the skin of the community where the incarnational presence finds itself. Jesus put on skin, but he put on a very unique and particular cultural skin. And oftentimes when we go places, when we serve the missional purposes of the church, there's a disconnect because we never truly put on the skin of the place that we are in. Context should shape our engagement with our community, the content of our messaging. Not that it changes the meaning of the Bible, but it means that the Bible has got to be communicated in a way relevant to the speech of the people that I'm trying to connect with and engage with. And then it's really about empowerment of the people themselves. And I think that's huge. Imperialism often has this presupposition of hierarchical power and professionalism at the highest ranks. So everything in essence becomes clergy-driven or clergy-led. And what I want to suggest is this enculturational view shifts that power and puts it into the hands of the congregations and the people in our context, and really shifts how we understand how that's supposed to look and what that's supposed to mean within the life of these different congregational settings. So we'll explore a little bit more in lecture 2.